Afternoon.
Hey Sandy, how you doing?
Good. How was your holidays?
Starts tomorrow.
Ah, nice. So I'm taking leave on Wednesday too.
You going anywhere?
Yeah, going to Torquay.
Nice, I like Torquay. We're going up to Northern Victoria to do the Silo Arts Trail.
So how many are there now?
7?
There's some good ones just out of Benalla. They're actually really good, some of those. So I've got, my mum lives up that neck of the woods, so yeah, we often peel off and just go and have a look.
Is that up above Ballarat Stall? Is that way, or where's Benalla?
Benalla is near, have you heard of Yarrawonga?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my mum lives on the border, but she lives on the New South Wales side, so I haven't seen
it might be that way, because we get almost to the very top of Victoria, so it's probably...
Yeah, it will be. So yeah, so I haven't seen her since I did a quick dash trip in June, but I haven't, that's the only time I've seen her this year. So he's hoping. He's hoping.
Yeah, that's right.
So anywho, I'll leave you be.
Bradley, it's Mike.
Hi, Mike.
On your way back, you could actually cut across to Benalla. There's the silos just out of Benalla, but then there's the street art around the city of Benalla.
Oh, yeah.
So they've done all the murals, and they have all the artists from around the world come there. I think it's each year, and do all the street art on the building.
Okay, I'll have a look at. We've already got sort of mapped out. I'll see if that's part of where we're going.
Yeah, cool.
Very good. Benalla. Benalla. Just give it another couple minutes and we'll get started. Just added it to my notes. All right, everybody, we might get into it on this lovely blustery day. I'm sitting out in my backyard on the deck. Very windy, but lovely. My pool looked like a forest this morning after being all cleaned over the weekend. It was unbelievable, but got out to it early before it all sunk and looks all right again. As I said, we finished our specific leadership content last time, although leadership's a very broad topic and everything we learn really falls into it. But we're starting our quality program today, which will take us through total quality service, just slightly into TQM, not much, and into cycle time reduction, which will be in another section, but it's part of the quality. I love this stuff because very few people have ever encountered it, have had much to do with it, unless you're in that game or you're in a manufacturing environment. I've used it extensively, really since the late 80s, and modeled flexures off of it. So all the things that you see, the way we do things at Fletcher's is really based on TQS philosophy, which is heavily ingrained in the way I think. And I'll tell you as we go through things, a lot of things I did when I first came to Fletcher's to reorientate the entire business, to re-engineer it to be from a TQS mentality. And I did the same in my last law firm. It was all built around TQS. So whether you guys realize it or not, you're pretty operating for the most part in a TQS environment, but you don't see it necessarily day to day. This will go over, TQS will go over at least 2 modules, maybe more, but at least 2, and cycle time reductions 1, and then we'll finish the course with presentation skills. So we're moving along. If you have questions or comments as we go, feel free to ask. It's really sort of kind of fun topic and quite interesting. Things really cost more when you don't do them right than when you do them right. And so the cost of quality in a broad term is error, and error is the enemy of quality. So we're going to traverse how that happens. You know, we seldom improve quality by cutting costs, but we can often cut costs by improving quality, because most people don't realize how much time it takes to fix things and to replace things and to change things that aren't right. It's far better to get it right in the first place, and it's far better to have quality production, therefore eliminating error, which error causes lots of things: stress, extra cost, extra time. And when we're doing TQS, the cycle time reduction, which comes in after, is a really good tool to help mitigate some of those costing issues as well. So that builds on this really well. Failure costs is what we've already spent by the time we get something wrong and have to throw it out, start over, do it all again. And that can be both in terms of labor and materials. You know, let's just say we're working on a submission and printing it out in color and doing all this, spending all this time, and then we change our tact or do something else, and we have to throw all that out and start over. Or we send somebody to the printer to realize it's got an error in it. You just got to start over, and you just got to work out that cost and throw it all out. Replacement cost is to fix the problem, to get it right. Prevention. Well, that was fun. I've got a new laptop and I'm still sort of working through things, and things keep happening that I just don't fully get, like that. That's an error. Look, we just lost 30 seconds. You'll understand that more when we get to cycle time. Prevention costs is the setting up things and controls in that so it doesn't happen again. And it's amazing how many systems have been built around an error, something that's gone wrong, and then how many times people will spend to make sure they get it right, and how much fixes they put in. And sometimes it's kind of ridiculous because it's a one-off thing that could never happen again, but other times it's something that deservedly should be fixed. And really your cost to your business, because as a result of it, you might lose current business, you might lose future business, you know, piss off the wrong person, and, you know, and never get it again because you did something wrong. I'll give you an example of this, which we were talking about yesterday for another reason. Years ago, my ex-wife had a bag business where she used to go into she had a retail fashion background. She used to go into all the retailers and produce bags for them, but she wasn't a manufacturer. She was the middle person where she'd go in, sign them up, create the artwork. She had about 5 different bag manufacturers in Australia and some in Asia, and she'd have bags made. She landed a huge contract with Cook-Eye, and they wanted, like, you know, some 1 million bags, you know, but they wanted to start out with one order and see how it went. And they created the artwork. She put it to her bag manufacturer, the right one, made the bags as the samples, took them into Cook-Eye. They weren't at all what they wanted in the quality, whatever, and they canceled the whole order. And she never got the Cook-Eye order, which would have been huge, simply because the manufacturer, what the sample they did or sent wasn't at all of the quality that it should have been. And there you go. You lose all that business. And we have the same thing. What if we have a landlord who we don't service right and they take away their properties and we never get them back again, or a vendor who withdraws their property and we don't sell their next 3 properties? The cost of us is significant. The whole morale issue, because we only have so much energy for things and we get tired if things are done wrong or we lose business. You know, things that are going wrong are tiring for us. It's a simple fact. You know my saying, if you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got. And, you know, if you're not prepared to do things differently, to change the game, to improve things, then you usually aren't going to get much of a change. So part of the whole TQS philosophy and that for us guys here is let's do things better. When we identify things that should be done better, let's make sure we do. This is that, you can read the little cartoon first. This is that cycle of mediocrity that just, you know, nothing gets done right because they don't listen, they don't do it, you know, blame everyone else. That's an environment that's not empowered. It's not a particularly good one. And again, variable performers use this sort of line all the time. Quality people, quality performers don't.
I was at the coffee bar this morning and a lady came up, had waited so long for the coffee to brew, her bagel had gotten cold. She said, "Could I have a warm bagel?" And the woman behind the counter had been well trained. She didn't show it, not as long as that lady was looking at her, but I kept looking at her. When the lady turned away, that face just became a mask of, if I could, I'd do a very naughty thing with this bagel. So instead of doing that, she just threw it at the garbage can, missed it too. That's no attitude to take when you're out to serve, folks. It's always about them. It isn't about us. So the next time you get all feathers up and you're all huffy and you just don't like the way you're being treated, hey, get over it. It isn't about you.
TQM was built for the manufacturing environment. It came from Arthur Deming, who is the father of Edward Deming, sorry, is the father of quality movement. And it's about a process of seeking to continuously improve everything that we do. It's about all the processes in an organization that produces things, but it tended to be in a manufacturing environment. And where it gained all its fame was in when he took it to Japan after World War II. And it was a funny thing is he was an engineer who couldn't get much traction in America, who had a vast majority of the manufacturing industry going. And he went to Japan as part of the Marshall Plan to rebuild Japan after World War II. And he became literally a god in Japan because, number one, because of what happened to them, they accepted that the West was superior. And then this guy came as the expert and he re-engineered their entire manufacturing industry to get to where Japanese by the 90s dominated every electronic industry, the automobile industry, the banking, insurance industries. They had like 7 of the top banks, 7 of the top insurers, 9 of the top automobile manufacturers, all the stereo. They had 5 of the 7 men, a motorcycle. They had, you know, and it was all came out of this quality movement, which came out of Deming, which came out of TQM. And the sort of the belief was you couldn't apply this into service industries until later when it was, you know, sort of reinvented for that. Sorry, I'm just having a problem with my display here. All right. TQM is about everybody who's involved in it, being involved in the process and having a quest for quality. So whatever departments, whatever people, so this whole thing about quality circles, involving all the different departments, involving the person doing the job, all came out of the TQM environment, total quality management, or all came out of that sort of culture. Oh, this thing's driving me crazy. What we're trying to do is lower our cost, improve our production effectiveness, lower our error rates, obviously designed to create long-term competitiveness, improve the jobs for those companies that adopt it. It's all about that process of getting better and better at manufacturing. And Motorola took this, which is an American company, in the 80s and 90s, adopted TQM, and they created a program called Six Sigma, which was 6 errors per million in the manufacturing sector. Six Sigma. And they created that. They are the ones who invented cycle time reduction as well, but they invented that Six Sigma, and they started to make that every one of their suppliers in the Motorola supply chain, and Motorola was a huge manufacturer in those days. I'm not sure they're as big now, but they were huge. And so every one of their suppliers had to be Six Sigma approved to supply Motorola, because if the suppliers aren't doing their parts right, then it affects Motorola when they're assembling everything. And so they created this whole supply chain Six Sigma program. Then they introduced it globally, and it became one of the biggest money spinners for Motorola out there, which was their quality program, Six Sigma. And I was fortunate to do a Six Sigma course in the 80s and introduce it into my firm. And it's pretty amazing stuff. We used the cycle time reduction component, but it's all about this whole idea that we can really lower the error rate, therefore improve quality, lower our costs. And there's a real funny story, true story, that a Japanese company in the 90s that was a Six Sigma company was contacted by an American organization who wanted their product. And they said in the order, we want to order 100,000 items, whatever it was, and we will expect no greater than a 6% error rate. And a 6% error rate on 100,000 would be 6,000 items. And the Japanese company, when they sent their order, they responded to say, well, here's 100,000 ones you ordered with no errors, and if we ever make any with errors, we'll hold those back, because they were actually a company that had achieved literally flawless production following the Six Sigma methodology. And if you think of 6% in a million, or 6 items in a million, not percent, 6 items in a million, you know, you're literally no error rate. And you can do that in the manufacturing process, and you can do that in service to a degree as well, following some really good methodologies. So TQM is all about taking pride in all aspects of the design, putting everything together from the very start to the very end, and making sure that everything is designed with a quality process in mind. So if you're getting a supply from a third party, they have to follow the same methodology you do, or else your whole sort of methodology falls apart. It's trying to use the organization's resources to the best of its ability, because the more time we spend on error and replacement, then the less efficient we are, and the more people get stressed and lose morale and belief in the company, because we're producing crap, let's call it. An interesting thing that got Motorola into Six Sigma was in the 80s, Motorola was synonymous with crappy products, always. You bought Motorola because it was cheap, and the head of Motorola, a new head, came in and he called in all his leading people from all over the world into a big meeting. And he said, I want you to tell me what you think Motorola stands for. And he got all sorts of answers. And he said, well, it actually stands for crappy, because everything we produce is crappy. And we're going to change that. And that's when they invested in Six Sigma and built this whole new philosophy at Motorola. Edward Deming created this Plan, Do, Check, Act, which was the philosophy around TQM of how you actually do things. And it's about gathering data and plan your improvement. What are you going to do? Communicate and develop a plan. check on the progress against what you're trying to achieve, and then if it's achieved, standardize it. If not, go through it again and keep that process going around and around in circles.
Yes.
Mr. Jobs, you're a bright and influential man.
Here it comes.
It's sad and clear that on several counts you've discussed, you don't know what you're talking about. I would like, for example, for you to express in clear terms how, say, Java, in any of its incarnations, addresses the ideas embodied in OpenDoc. And when you're finished with that, perhaps you could tell us what you personally have been doing for the last 7 years.
You know, you can please some of the people some of the time, but one of the hardest things when you're trying to affect change is that people like this gentleman are right in some areas. I'm sure that there are some things OpenDoc does, probably even more that I'm not familiar with, that nothing else out there does. And I'm sure that you can make some demos, maybe a small commercial app that demonstrates those things. The hardest thing is, how does that fit in to a cohesive, larger vision that's going to allow you to sell $8 billion, $10 billion of product a year? And one of the things I've always found is that you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it. And I've made this mistake probably more than anybody else in this room. And I've got the scar tissue to prove it. And I know that it's the case. And as we have tried to come up with a strategy and a vision for Apple, it started with what incredible benefits can we give to the customer? Where can we take the customer? Not starting with, let's sit down with the engineers and figure out what awesome technology we have, and then how are we going to market that? And I think that's the right path to take.
Start with the customer.
Yes.
Start with the customer. Start with the customer. Customer focus, not starting with a technology and then working the other way. Not starting with, let's design a car and then later on see if we can actually sell it to anyone. And that's what the whole, TQM and then TQS movement began to change in the way people did things in companies. Become customer reference. What's the need the customer wants? Can we fulfill that need? Let's just not think we can create something and invent something. Oh, we got this great thing. We don't even know if anybody wants it. So TQS is about winning and keeping the customers by doing the right things outstandingly well. And it was created by Carl Albrecht, who was a consultant at the time in Boston Consulting. And he wrote a book called The Only Thing That Matters. And he'd studied all of these companies as to what was good and what was bad, and came up with creating ultimately the TQS philosophy around it. And he went out and formed the TQS Institute. His first big clients were Scandinavian Airlines and then British Airlines. And he changed the entire way those service companies operated. And British Airlines is an incredible success story of where it came from and where it went to. And I'll give you a little personal experience that when I was 20 years old, I was flying on a plane from LA to London on my first overseas trip other than Mexico. And I was on my own. and I was a British Airlines flight, and I was sitting in the middle seat of 3, and the guy on the right of me was someone handicapped who was carried into his chair from his wheelchair, and he had a blanket over his legs, and he was sleeping. And I really wanted a drink, and I rang the bell, and the steward came along, and I'm this 20-year-old kid, and I said to him, "Excuse me, but could I get a glass of water?" And he goes, "Get it yourself," and he walked away. Now, this is 1980. This is the pre-British Airways revolution on TQS. And he later came back a few minutes later and said, "Oh, I'm really sorry about that." And because I actually, as he was sort of leaving, I pointed to the guy next to me, and then he came back with a glass of water and said, "I'm really sorry." But I would have never experienced that from an American service provider at that time. And I was shocked, to be frank, that attitude. And that was British Airways in the early 80s until Carl Albrecht got his way. And he wrote a book about Scandinavian Airlines when he studied it, and it was called 10,000 Moments of Truth. And it was a famous quality book written, one of the first ones, about how every single day they have 10,000 moments of truth, which we'll come and explain more in detail with. And they're great reads, you know, probably a bit dated now, but really interesting reads, the only thing that matters, and 10,000 moments of truth. So TQS is a state of affairs where the organization delivers superior value to its stakeholders, which is the customers, the owners, the employees, and really the supply chain as well. It's, are we delivering value to everybody involved in the organization? That's what TQS is concerned with. And we're going to cover this in a lot of detail. TLC is not Elvis's tender loving care. It's think like a customer. Think like a customer. The more you can think like a customer, the more successful you generally are in servicing people. Remember that first video today. It's not about you, it's about them. It's about creating an experience they want. It's about what they need. It's not about you. It's not about your situation. So, you know, everybody from the highest executive to the other line people need to understand and appreciate how it feels and looks like to be a customer. And, you know, that sleep out CEO thing they do, which I have to admit I haven't done, where they put CEOs out on the street for the night to get a feeling of what it's like, is to think like, you know, the homeless people. That show in America, The Boss, The Hidden Boss, Secret Boss, whatever it is, where they put a boss out in the line to see what it's really like and what's really going on. Those sort of things. So we've already got a task. We got like a lot of tasks with this one, and I sent you a PDF of the presentation and also a Word doc this morning of the tasks. Task 1 is, and I think there's only 2 questions yet, is think and document what you do now to try to think like a customer in your respective role. What do you do to try to be in touch with your customers? And what else could you do to think more like a customer? Go ahead and spend a couple minutes. Just think about that for a minute. And let me just explain something to you. If you don't deal with the public, let's say you're Beth at Fletcher's, and Beth mostly deals with Fletcher's people, they're your customers. Your customers can be internal or external customers. If you're a frontline person, then it's the external. If you're an internal person, then it's the actually your colleagues who are sales or PM people. What could you do more to think more like a customer than you do now, and what do you do now? Just spend a couple minutes on that, thanks. And I'd like to get some examples when you're done. Okay, maybe could I get anyone might like to answer either of these questions about what you do now to think like a customer, or what you could do to do that better?
I can say, Bradley.
Yeah, Jack.
When I look back at what it was like when I was buying and selling a home, put myself in their shoes and what I didn't like and what I liked. And I even asked my wife, there was, when we were buying a house, there were certain agents she liked, and it was more because they related to her, they followed up a lot. And yeah, so I try to be a bit like that as well. I also, when I guess present or getting a house ready to present for photos, I get a stylist in, which again gives another opinion of how a buyer would look at a house, I guess. But also it helps me in regards to, they say the things that I might find hard to say to somebody about the furniture in their house or the way they've, presented it. Yeah.
Excellent. And that's what they always say. You should buy and sell a house before you're a real estate agent, so you sort of experience it, yourself. I agree. Who else? That's great, Jack. Anyone else?
I will, Bradley. Being property management, there's a lot of people that probably look down on tenants, and I think that's a really tough thing for a tenant. So when I do open for inspections, I like to greet everybody, and I like to treat everybody how I would like to be treated, as in with respect, and answer people's questions and be polite and make eye contact and be acknowledging those people that come to have a look at the house, because you never know, your next tenant might be your next landlord. So
Yeah, excellent.
I like to look about that sort of side of it.
Perfect. Remember Gary Pier's line I said to you guys weeks and weeks ago, treat every human you meet as a potential income stream. It's a pretty good guide to being successful. I mean, how many tenants own their own property? Lots of them. But even if they didn't, they're a client, you treat them with respect. They're a human, you treat them with respect. I agree completely. And you've invited them to come look at the property. And Sandy, just be aware from the sales side, there are a lot of agents who don't treat buyers with respect. So don't think it's just tenants. Who else? Anyone else got some feedback on this?
Yeah, Bradley, I think following on from Sandy's point, when as a sales agent, we're putting a property on the market that is tenanted, we have to be mindful for the tenant, there's nothing in it for them. They're living there on a lease. So to think how they'd feel, the inconvenience for them for zero return.
Absolutely. And you got to get them on side, don't you?
100%, or you're gone.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that, Ian?
Yep.
There's, when we approach a tenant to tell them that the house is being sold, the panic and fear factor that tenants have, knowing that they have to move. So you are very right in what you're saying in regards to working with that tenant and getting them on side. You'll have a much better campaign.
Yeah, agree.
Anyone else have any comments on this before we move on?
I'll go, Bradley.
Yeah.
For me, and I probably deal 50-50 with external and internal customers. For me, I try to think about what I would want out of that experience if I was that person, and being mindful of word of mouth. So would I be happy for the way this interaction is going to be shared with other colleagues or put on a review website or shared with anybody? Would I be okay with it? Would I be proud of it? And that's then how I try to approach the dealings, I suppose.
Yeah, excellent. Put yourself in their shoes. Never judge someone till you walk a mile in their moccasins, as they say. Remember what we did in DISC, the platinum model is do as they would like done. And the more you understand them, the more chance you have of actually achieving that. Yeah, very good. Anyone else like to comment before we continue on?
Bradley, it's Mike.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, just a quick one. I guess these days with the digital reviews that are posted and all those types of things, you've got to be always thinking about what's that client going to be writing about you at the end of the experience. because that's potentially going to affect your future referral stream and future income. So I think that's important these days because you've got the digital interview before you even get in the door. So that's something else to think about.
Can I give you an approach that I use as a consultant? I've mentioned this to you guys weeks and weeks ago, but I would be doing this in your role as a salesperson or in PM. And I would absolutely do this on every single client I'm dealing with. And with the buyers, as you are rounding off a buyer, not the 100 buyers coming through the home, but the buyer that's buying the property, I would be saying to them that I'm a service provider to you. And at the end of this, when we're finished, I would like you to be able to give me a glowing review on social media. And I'd like to know what I need to do for that to happen. So at the end of this, you want to say, I've done a 10 out of 10. What have I actually done for you? Because you are so setting the stage for them to be able to say, well, Michael, we would really like to have regular feedback. Michael, and you take them through our, vendor checklist of the things that we want, but, asking them, what is it that I could do for you that's going to make you a raving fan of mine at the end of this transaction? So not only have I sold your house and got the time right and the price you're looking, but what else, And if you do that, you have so much greater chance of achieving that and saying at the end, all right, you told me you wanted me to do this, this, and this. I've done it. How did I go? What do you think? And if you did the same thing with buyers, you're going to cement that buyer into seeing you as their agent. And really, they're in your house now in the footprint, and they're your new client, most likely. And you want the buyer to feel the same way as the vendor. At the end of that transaction, they think you're great. So I would be absolutely full on. And I do that whenever I consult. The first questions I sort of ask is, if at the end of this year from now, I've done an incredible job for you, what have I done? There's another exercise. So we're going to let me just list out these questions. All right. So to better understand your needs, review feedback from your team receives from your customers and answer questions. First of all, how do you get feedback for your area? And we get it through surveys, we get it through people returning comments, we get it through social media. But what do you get in your respective roles that helps you to understand that? What are they generally saying? What is that feedback telling you? Do you use that information? Do you try to improve from it? Do you try to clarify it? Do you try to repost it so it's positive, it's going out to other people? Are you using it in an active pipe blast? What are you doing with it? How could you use the information differently than you might be using it? So just spend a few minutes analyzing your own situation. And if you're Jacqueline or Melissa and maybe you don't have answers to that, think about what it should be with regard to what you do. And even Jacqueline, you asking your colleagues about how they're going. Do they understand their payroll? Do they understand this? How could, what feedback do they need to give you? Whatever. Just think about your respective areas. I see lots of heads down, so I'll just give it another minute and then we'll continue on. Okay, who'd like to comment about any of this? Somebody we haven't heard from today?
Bradley, I'll go. Seeing as you singled me out.
Sure, Jacqueline.
Well, as you know, I deal with a lot of different stakeholders, I guess, purchasers and vendors on the financial side of things, tenants and owners on the financial side of things, office supplies, our own staff to do with payroll and expense reimbursements and things like that. So I guess the feedback I get is responses to what I'm doing, directly related to what I'm doing. So it might be inquiries about their payroll, or it might be a supplier inquiring about whether or not an invoice has been processed for payment, or you know, a purchaser wanting a receipt for you know, a deposit they've made, or a vendor wanting clarification about the funds we're holding, that sort of thing. So mine is quite a direct response to my actions. So the feedback I get is a direct response to my actions.
Sure.
And I guess when I'm responding to that, I need to understand what their query is and respond to the query, but then also work out if there's a process improvement that's required in case, you know, there's a breakdown in the way things are done.
Sure.
Yeah.
And maybe one step in there that you didn't say, but you probably do, is also to make sure they're satisfied with, once you provided the response, is it now resolved their situation? Is there anything else they need?
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's always really a positive thing to do with people. Make sure that, you know, they know it's not just a task. You actually care that you got it right, that they've got what they need, and they can move on as well.
Yeah. Very much so. Yeah.
Anyone else comment?
Yeah, I'll have a go. All right. We do a couple. We do and it's a weekly thing that has to happen. We do what we call a high call, which is a no purpose call, just to our landlords, to our client list. And we basically ask them for straight up feedback, or if there's anything that we can do to help them. It's a straight up, you know, hi, it's Sandy from Fletcher's in the Yarra Ranges, Bradley. Just touching base, no cause for concern, just touching base with you today. I'm just looking for some feedback and making sure that you're happy with the service that I'm giving you and Fletcher's is giving you. So it's a very scripted, very customer service based call. So we get good and bad from that. Majority of it we get good. The downfall to that could be that we choose who we want to contact, so we know we're always going to get good things said about us. The other one that we have is on the bottom of Alana's and my email is Scott and Glenn's email, and it actually says that if they would like to give any feedback to the directors away from us, they have that point of contact straight away. So which that's an interesting scenario. In the time I've been with Fletcher's, I've had a bit of a mixed bag, to where I've had incredible praise to people saying, basically, I'm not happy. So, and then that's my job to kick in and actually rectify that service that they're looking for and be able to clarify and work on that better with them to keep
Right.
the business.
You guys should look at the product we're now using at PM is Alio. It's a fantastic feedback tool. Takes a bit to implement it, but it's fantastic. And we're now using it across our offices, and it takes away a lot of the guesswork, and it's a really great tool. Anyway, Patricia could fill you in on that.
Cool.
All right, thanks very much for that. I'm going to continue moving. Process improvement is about doing better with less, right? It's about making everything customer driven. If we're not improving customer satisfaction or the profit margin, why are we doing it? It's trying to align everything to ultimately deliver customer value. And remember, our customers are our internal customers as well. If we can make processes more simple, then that's going to help our people. More effective, it helps our people. Obviously helps the client as well. You know, think about implementing again, you know, sending authority straight out, how much easier it is now for clients, and they have it all and it goes straight to the lawyers. And, you know, it's made it easier for salespeople, but it's also made it more effective for the clients and for their suppliers. The client no longer has to then send that off. We don't have to come back and email it or mail it to a lawyer. It's just all done. So some of the core philosophical or philosophy of TQS is that your standards, your quality standards should be customer referenced. In other words, the customer defines quality. It should be based about the response you're getting from your customers, the time it takes, the satisfaction they get, the achieving their outcomes. All of those. Customer reference helps determine whether we're actually achieving it. I remember years ago when I was with one of my law firms, and we were in an AMP building, so they were our landlords. They also happened to be our largest client. They also happened to be our insurer. And there was a fire in the building. And that fire was started in one of our offices, but it also affected AMP's, some of their team as well, and a few of the floors. And we were working through with the insurance assessors trying to get our business back and going, and it was major, like shut us down, like it was a major issue. And the insurance broker was telling me what a great job they're doing. And I actually took that person aside. I didn't do it in front of my partners and that we were having the conversation. I took them aside, the team of them, and I said, I'm the customer. I define quality, not you, and you're not doing a great job. You are not helping us get back on our feet urgently like we need to. And the more you play bureaucrat with us, the longer it takes us to service our clients, the more money we lose, the more money you're going to lose. So I'm going to define quality, not you. Don't you telling me you're doing a great job when you're not. This is what I need now, you know. And I was like full on. But it was the customer. I said, the customer defines quality, not you. Don't you sit here and tell me you're doing a great job when you're not. I'm the one who's affected, you know, being affected by this. And think about things from a customer's perspective. The customer defines quality, not you. The value focus of delivering value has to be internally as well as externally, because you can never deliver better service externally than you're delivering internally. And I've said that to you guys before, you know, if our marketing team isn't delivering, our salespeople can't deliver. If somebody makes a mistake in the settlement process in finance, it affects the salesperson's relationship with that client. If we have a supplier who doesn't deliver, it affects the relationship our salesperson has with that client. We're only as good externally as we are internally. And I love this, and it's something that should stay with you guys for the rest of your life, you know, and I'll explain it further. But, you know, in a service culture, everybody has a customer. And, you know, there's somewhere it's going to come up and say, if you're not serving the customer, you better be serving someone who is. Because in other words, everyone is a supplier and a customer in this chain. And I'll make sure I cover that as it comes through. The thing about service is it's an intangible. You know, when you go to a Coke machine and you put your money in and the can of Coke comes out, you know exactly what you're expecting to get, and you know exactly what you're getting. The service experience is completely different. It's an intangible experience that leaves somebody with a feeling. And that's completely determined by the attitude that person has who's receiving it. If they're hostile to you to begin with, it's pretty hard no matter what you do. If they're well disposed to you, they give you some more leeway. You could do the same thing for 5 people and get 5 different reactions because it is an intangible thing. And therefore, service quality is a harder thing to define and measure than a tangible product quality. So I just want to, give you another quick example. I got called by the after service manager of BMW the other day because my lease is about to run out, my 5-year, or I bought it, but my 5-year finance thing. And she wanted to know if I was going to want to upgrade or trade in my car for another BMW. And I said to her, well, since you're asking, from a product point of view, I like driving my car, but I've never had a car that has more problems than this car. And I would never buy another BMW forever. And I won't. But I'd like you to know, and why don't you go and look at my service record and you'll see that it's been horrendous with this car. But everyone at your dealership's been lovely. They've been really helpful. They've fixed everything. They've caused me minimum amount of grief. They've done things gratis because of the problems. But the product itself, the tangible thing, is a massive letdown. But you should know that your service culture at your organization is really good. I'm sure she didn't expect that feedback, but anyway, that's what she got. As we said, customers have different needs. It's very difficult to have one solution fits all because you order a can of Coke, they're all the same, and people have that expectation, they're all the same. But in service delivery, people have very different expectations. Just like a waiter or waitress trying to service each table, everybody's different. Some people want to be left alone. Some people want to be fussed over. Some people want to get a drink straight away. Some people want to get a drink later. And it's your job to sort of figure that out. Again, in a service experience, there's a lot more contact than in a production situation, in a tangible product. As long as Coke does their studies on what people want and they put their machines in the right place or in the right restaurants, that Coca-Cola organization doesn't have a whole lot to do with the customer directly, but yet we do. In a service game, it's entirely face-to-face interaction, whether it be physical, email, phone, whatever, but it's regular contact. And in a service experience, the customer participates in the process. And they can cause their own grief in the process. They can make things harder. They can do things wrong and screw things up or be really difficult or not get back to us when we need answers from them to be able to do something for them. We're waiting to get a bank account to transfer funds and they're screaming at us as why haven't we transferred the funds? There's all sorts of these things that get involved in a service transaction. And as we said, you've got to really imply that judgment, character, competence, judgment, wisdom. It's all part of that process to get the right outcome when we're talking about a service experience. So TQS has come up with its own sort of model of dealing with all the components necessary to end up with a successful outcome. And I appreciate that most of you aren't in a position where you're re-engineering departments, you're re-engineering teams, but you're all involved in processes that affect you, and you have control over some of those. And I don't care whether you're Sandy, who walked away in PM, or you're Ian, who I can see, or Jacqueline, I can see at the moment. And you guys have 3 very different jobs, but you are all defined, within a system where you have control over things that you do, the way you structure your day, the way you talk to your clients, the way you set up and run your opens, the way you follow back things. You have control over that. Jacqueline, you have control over your day, etc. And when you talk to people and how you process things and how you take feedback and how you record issues that you have to deal with. And so we all have our own little ecosystems within a bigger ecosystem. So you might not be someone who's changing Fletcher's or your office, but you might be able to change your own environment, the way you work to a degree. So total quality is about greater customer satisfaction, lowering cost, increasing production capacity, improving the long-term competitive advantage of what you do. Better happy clients, less money to do it is what we're really trying to achieve in that sort of TQS sort of thinking. And, you know, I mean, really, the more we think about it, is quality pays. You get happier clients, you get more retention, it costs you less to do it, you get more referrals. If it's an internal thing, you have higher customer satisfaction of your clients, of your staff. You know, if we're making our clients really happy, then that's making our staff really happy. If we're making our staff happy and it's easy for them to do their job, they can usually make their clients happy. Sort of pays all the way around to work in a quality environment. So, as we said, the customer defines the quality. Good quality is quality that consistently pleases the customer at as low a cost as we can actually manage to do it. We serve all customers inside and out of the organization. And remember that, you know, the next person in the process is your customer. So in case I've said this to you before in the Covey, but in case I forget to say this again somewhere, think about it for a minute. When you're Jacqueline and somebody gives Jacqueline something to do, they need a letter confirming their employment and their package for the bank. Well, when Jacqueline gets that, she's actually the customer receiving it, and they're the supplier providing it. And if they don't provide what she needs, for example, maybe they forgot to tell her where she needs to send the letter. So she then has to send them an email follow back and say, can you tell me who I'm addressing this letter to? So therefore, it's not a quality process in a sense. There's already an error because she's had to go back to clarify information. It takes more time, more steps, more money. If they'd given her everything she needed in the first place, then she wouldn't have to go back to them to clarify. When Jacqueline produces that letter and sends it back to Bill as the person receiving it or the salesperson who's asked for it, they're now the customer receiving it and she's the supplier. And is she giving them what they need? And if you can think in terms of that everybody is a supplier and a customer in the chain, you can get a much greater outcome. I always remember when I first started to dictate using a dictation machine, and this goes back to 1986, a long time ago. And I had a secretary, and somebody taught me how to use the machine, and I was dictating letters to her and things all day long. And then after 2 or 3 months, she went on holidays, and I had a temp. And I dictated something, and the temp came into my office and said, where am I meant to save this, into what directory, and what form of document is it? I said, oh, well, I've said that in the tape. She goes, yeah, but if you don't say it up front, I can't create the right document and I can't save it appropriately when I start. I said, oh, all right, I didn't know that. Okay. When my PA came back, I said to her, how come you never, she goes, oh, I didn't want to bother you. I said, so that means that everything I dictate to you causes you more frustration and difficulty to do it because you don't know what document I'm talking about until I finally say it, and you don't know where to save it until I finally tell you. She goes, yeah. I said, well, that's pretty stupid. I said, you know, clearly that's not how we work. Why wouldn't you know? Anyway, she wasn't a very good PA, by the way. She was forced on me long time ago, but she was sleeping with the managing partner, and he made me take her as my PA. And I was 26 and didn't have a whole lot of say. another really funny story about her is I can't spell very well. And particularly in those days without spell check, and I really couldn't spell. I was a really, really bad speller. I'm still a bad speller, but I was really bad. And I didn't really like her a whole lot. And she wasn't the best PA. And anyway, she came to my office one day and said, you know, you just can't spell. And what happens one day if you have a secretary who can't spell? And I said to her, I said, well, I'd fire her ass. And I said, now get out of my office and don't ever question my spelling again, because yes, I can't spell and you're here to spell for me. I was 26. I couldn't say that now, especially when you're sleeping with the managing partner. We must aim to please the customer sort of at every stage, because the sum of all the interactions will lead to their view of how it went. So when Ian is doing a campaign or Jack's doing a campaign, it's not the final outcome. It's not the first meeting. It's the whole process from the time they talk to you until that's done and it's settled and they've relocated. They're going to take all those things and they're going to go, this is my impression of Fletcher's and Jack. This is my impression. That's what it's all about. And people don't get that. They think, oh, I can turn it on later, or I can turn it on now and, you know, and coast. And you can't. It's every interaction. It only takes one to really screw the, you know, you guys remember the emotional bank account. What it's saying there really is that there are other people as well, like, you know, a process for buyers, or, you know, as Sandy said, tenants. We might see 20 people come through or 100 people come through. Only one is going to buy the property, but the other 99 have experienced us and have a view of us. And of those 99, how many are going to eventually sell a house or you know, or rent out a house? And do they want to use us or not? And when we run ads or we put things in the paper or we do things in mailboxes, we're trying to create a brand image that affects people who we may never deal with directly, but it's affecting now those people perceive us. And therefore we have to be very mindful that our processes affect lots of people, you know. And, you know, for example, we might have a process that a solicitor says to the vendor, hey, this is really bad. And we never even saw that coming. And all of a sudden the client has a real issue with us because their solicitor said they don't like our process. They don't think it's right. You know, we just got to, you got to be mindful when you're thinking of the quality environment, that 360 environment. The third is involving and empowering people, because you can't impose quality. They have to understand it or they don't do it. We create checklists and then they don't follow them. We had a situation recently in property management where we thought it's pretty clear how properties should be allocated, new properties, and yet the people doing it were doing it wrong because they really hadn't been following the process, even though the process was in place. So it's not a quality process because there was no checking mechanism to make sure that it's actually being done. Now there's a check process in place to make sure that what we think is happening is actually happening. So it's everyone's responsibility. And remember that nobody knows the job as well as the person who's doing it. Nobody knows usually the feedback from customers as well as that person. Nobody knows how to improve it better than that person. Did you guys know that the Dodgers won the World Series? Sorry, Melissa. Supervisors should be coaches and helping. They're not police officers. They're not referees. They're trying to improve the process. They're trying to coach people to do a better job. The more teamwork you can have, the more your process can be really aligned, the more it can work in a seamless way. If you've got people who are at odds with each other, who aren't relating and aren't communicating, then things fall off the shelf. They just stop. You got two people on a team. So years ago, I rented a property through Jealous Craig, and it was before we moved into here. We had a time period where we were like 9 months, and we rented a property down the street. And there was a system where they had a property manager and assistant property manager. And I got to tell you, it was a terrible system because they never communicated. And it would just, you tell somebody to one thing and the other one would never know it. You tell it to that person, that one wouldn't know it. And it was a really bad system. They did not have a quality system that left you feeling at all good. And if I wasn't Fletcher's, if I was anyone else, I would never have used them again. And I would never say anything positive about their property management department because it was terrible. And it wasn't just that, there was so many problems. But that was a big part of it, is that there wasn't a quality system in place that one knew what the other was doing. They didn't keep notes properly. They didn't communicate properly. They didn't carry on tasks. You know, and the challenges for us in the workforce is when we started doing job shares, and we started, particularly job shares became really difficult at first because the level of communication between the two people job sharing wasn't usually good. And working out how do you do handovers and how do you make sure that whatever's left gets finished. And, you know, we've had the same challenges in marketing where we have part-time operators. They're only there a couple of days a week and other people are picking up their work. And we've had to build all these systems that keep the notes and keep the steps, regardless of who's doing it. So you can pick it up and know where you're at. But that whole teamwork thing is super important. Obviously, the whole goal is to work smart. And today, this has never been a more important time to just work smart. It's not about working hard. It's about minimizing the tasks, the systems, the costs, to keep it as simple as possible to get the best possible outcome. Planning and policy is about making sure that quality, and we talk about being best practice in everything we do as part of our vision. We want quality built into everything at Fletcher's, and we work really hard to do it. And I think we're very good at it. Nevertheless, we still have issues and we're still always improving and changing. But if you don't build it into the fundamental infrastructure of your business, it doesn't usually exist. And you all know when you're dealing with an organization that isn't quality, they don't return emails, they don't return calls, the products you get from them have a problem, you find it difficult to return it, all sorts of issues. You go into a restaurant and nobody helps you for a while, and then when you order something, they say, sorry, we're out of that. You get your food and it's a bit cold. They don't have quality processes. It's not very well run. Everyone's got to know what you're trying to achieve. You got to develop, your objectives, but then, how do you know you're doing it? How do you measure it? And, we've introduced Alio after a long effort in property management. We've got Rate My Agent in sales. We've got feedback mechanisms everywhere. We've been sending out survey stuff for years to our landlords, tenants, and vendors and buyers. We started doing more internal surveys with people just to understand, and then how do we measure and how do we deal with the feedback we get. Try to involve everybody who's affected by it, of course, and that alignment, just trying to make sure things fit together. The relationships, in a lot of real estate companies, you have internal services, you have sales, you have PM, and they're three distinct areas that no one talks to each other. They don't relate to each other. They're quite independent of each other, and therefore it can't work that well. We all know the goal is that it's seamless as possible. And when we have a situation where we have a property that's tenanted, but it's also one that's been put in by our sales team, and eventually it might come out of it and be sold, it's so critical that we're communicating on all those levels. And often we're not. And we've tried to make as many systems as possible to make it work really well. So we are all communicating. But this one particularly creates challenges. There's no question. It's leadership's role to, really be committed to quality and to make sure that it really matters. And when people do make mistakes or systems have problems, is to get to the bottom of it and fix it so it doesn't happen again. Is it a human error? Is it a systems error? When we had this problem recently with the allocation of properties, we didn't get mad at the BDMs and the people who didn't do it right. We just explained where they'd gone wrong. We fixed the system so in the future it would go right. And I've got to tell you, we probably put in, 40 or 60 hours of man hours to fix it. simply because people weren't following our procedure. That's a pretty big mistake and a very costly one. Plus it affected, relationships and financial relationships among several of our entities. And, all of it simply because people just weren't following a map. And there weren't a process put in place to make sure it worked. And you have to say that leadership wasn't committed to that process because they just put something in place and left it, called abdication. And therefore also you end up spending, to be frank, a shitload of time and senior time, me and Andrew and directors and partners and, having to fix something and ease a lot of tension and all of this simply because somebody didn't follow a process, or a few people didn't follow a process, and that's what happens. If you don't do the right things in selling somebody's property, they withdraw their property. You don't do the right things in managing their property, they withdraw their tenancy from you. And all of a sudden you've lost all that value and all the time you'd put into it and all the time you try to save it. It's a really big thing. So leadership's got to be really committed to this process. You got to create a consistent and purposeful approach that quality matters. And I believe at Fletcher's we have that. I believe that we have well and truly conquered any beast, although there's always the 80-20. There's always ways to get better. There's always ways to improve that. The hardest thing is informational knowledge. That's the hardest thing, is to transfer knowledge from one person to another, to institutionalize knowledge. And we've done absolutely hard as we can with MAVEM, with our operating manuals for each department, with all of the approaches we've created to try to do that. But it is really, really difficult to not lose people when they leave, to not lose the knowledge they had. And these, for example, this simple thing I just was explaining with the BDMs. If one BDM leaves and doesn't share that with the next BDM, then it's lost. Unless you have it in the system and you have it where it's trained. So, we've done our best with Trello to create checklists for everything, with MAVEM to have all our precedents and all of our things on there. We keep all our training videos, everything we ever do, we store, all for the purpose of trying to retain knowledge and be able to transfer that from one to the next to the next. It's not easy. I said earlier, our goal is to break down barriers between departments. If there's a big wall up, I might have said this to you guys ages ago, but when I went to one of my law firms and it was impossible to get anything done, I asked the one lady who could get things done, how do you get things done? And she said, I just don't worry about all the departments. I just go and get it done. I just do it. Because there were so many barriers to getting things done. And that's in a bad system. You have to do that. In a good system, it just works. But our goal of leadership, get rid of the barriers. Make sure people are talking, make sure systems work. When you have a problem, you sit down with the different departments and work together to achieve a win-win for both. So now it's easy and now it works. Not one department imposing on another. You got to have people realize you're not out for scalps, you're out for better systems, better outcomes, better results, to build trust so people will help improve things. And they won't hide it when there's a problem. They will admit when something's not right or something's broken or a mistake's been made. And if our people don't believe that, we've had, some really expensive mistakes over the journey, and nobody's lost their job over it. It's all been learning lessons. If somebody keeps making mistakes, yes, they've lost their job. I'm not going to put up with someone who can't learn and grow. But people who make a mistake, who've been good employees, we all make mistakes. And it doesn't matter whether it's a $100,000 mistake or a $10,000 mistake. It's still a single mistake that led to it. So you've got to drive that trust that that's what we're about, improving the system, getting a better outcome, not looking for scalps. Try to build a reward and recognition into everything you do. Give people a reason to do a good job. Give people a reason to believe in the systems. Remember, we talk about role model, lead by example. Nothing better you can do than that. In a quality environment, information is just critical. That's why Alio, Sandy is fantastic for property management. Rate My Agent's great for sales. It's just objective. We don't have to rely on hearsay. We can actually rely on data. White data is the data in six hats, as you guys remember. White data is about clean data. It's information that we have. It's real. And the more of that we have, the better we can manage our systems. We're going to use, later on, we're going to show charts and everything. And the more we can document and follow things, the more we can see trends, the more we can see that, the more successful we usually are. And continuous improvement is about constantly getting better. Sharpen the saw, seventh habit of Covey. Everything can be improved. All processes can be improved. Technology is always changing. We're always doing more with less. Again, get the process right. It's about the process. You know, if I'm Jack in sales and I want to be a really great salesperson, then my goal is I've got to manage a lot of properties at one time. If I want to write $1 million, I've got to have at least 15 to 20 listings on the go all the time. And I've got to be selling, you know, 6 to 8 properties every month. And if I'm not doing that, I'm not going to write $1 million. So to do that, I have to have quality processes. I've got to have a system to manage all those without variation. In other words, I know how I'm going to get from prospecting through managing the sale and through settlement. And I've got a system. And I've got a system where I can manage 10 or 15 opens a week at the same time. And I can still do this system in prospecting for new business. And if I can't do that, I can't write $1 million. If I don't focus on the process, I'll never do it. So, you know, same with writing 500. Same thing, with half the scale. It's about improving the process all the time. If there's a problem, figure it out. And there's a quote somewhere about sometimes it's not about fixing it, it's just throwing it out. But I can't remember the exact quote. You'll probably see it in one of my documents. Try to get rid of barriers. It's really important to understand the relationships that exist between the departments and the processes, because sometimes you have to work to improve those relationships or remove the barriers within those relationships. You know, you can't go to someone in a department and say, you know, you need to do X when they're not someone who's in a position to make a decision and they're being told to do Y by their leader. You know, you got to realize the relationships between these things, long-term, trying to get long-term improvement, not just quick fixes. Sometimes we got to get something quick done, but our goal is long-term improvement. Before I go on, is there any sort of questions or comments about any of that stuff? You all with me? All right. So TQS is looking at this model of saying it all starts with, and I think it actually spells it out, so I won't labor it too much, but it basically starts with our market and our customer understanding, and from there we move along, create strategy, educate, improve processes, get feedback, understand the market, and just keep moving around and around like that. We're just going like this continually in a quality environment and feeding all that back in to achieve what we're trying to achieve. Customer-centered companies see the customer as the starting point, the listening post, and the ultimate arbiter of everything we do. Remember, customer defines quality. The customer is at the center of our strategy, affects how we deal with our people and the systems we create. So when we think of strategy, it's what people can understand. It gives them a purpose and understanding of what they're meant to do. And they have to really understand, you know, how do they deliver customer value in this whole process? And the strategy has to be pulling that together and determining this is how we service our clients. This is what we're trying to achieve. This is how we're doing it. These are the way we're going to go. And then you can educate your people to have a real understanding of that and to get a spirit of service, that they care to service the clients really well. That British Airways guy in 1980 had no spirit of service, and they had to instill a whole attitude of service in what was essentially a government airline, turning it into a privatized airline and actually creating it. And Telstra was the same. It was just a bureaucracy, and they created, turned it into a private company. They had to change the whole service ethos of Telstra when they were trying to compete. They gave them like 5 or 10 years to deregulate the market and know they were going to compete with all these commercial companies who had a different attitude. You got to have the systems that support what you're trying to achieve. So if people want to achieve a high level of service delivery, but yet they're working with antiquated equipment, the services, the things keep crashing, doesn't work, the actual processing systems are really slow. If you have all that going, how do you expect people to deliver a high level of service? How do you expect them to achieve your outcome? When I first came to Fletcher's, our switchboards we had wouldn't transfer a call. So every time a call came through, we had to take the number down or give the number to the person to call the salesperson. And you know how many leads you'd lose that way? So the first thing I changed was putting in a PABX that could actually transfer to mobile. So we could sync it. So from now on, every call that came in went straight to mobile instead of being a message or having to give somebody a number. That didn't exist before I started looking at it from a quality point of view. And of course, everything is aligned to the customer's needs. Because if not, so this happened today. A salesperson felt that they got a bit dudded because they had spoken to a client twice in the last 6 or 9 months, and that client went and listed their property with another person at Fletcher's. And I got involved to understand both sides and how it all happened. And the person who listed the property gave me the account of what all happened. And basically, this salesperson in one office said to the client, the salesperson in the other office is terrific. And if we do it together, you're getting people from 2 offices and we can work together. And I think we should do that way. And the client said, I want to use you. I got nothing against that person. I only want to deal with one person in one office. And if you're not going to do it that way, I'm going to go and list it with Bill at this other agency. And he told him the name and he said, I've got the authority. I've got the commission. It's the same as yours. The marketing is slightly more expensive at your end, and that's fine. I want to do it with you. I only want you. And if you want to do it on that base, yes, customer defines quality. Yes, we'll take the listing. Yes, we'll do it that way. We can't impose what we want on someone else. We're trying to do the right thing. That client didn't want it. Bang. We're still giving the other agent some of the commission just as a goodwill gesture. But that's what the client wanted. The client defines quality. If you're not serving the customer, your job is to serve someone who is. And it's so critical that we think that way. And we have to think that we're both customers and suppliers all the time. And I never stop telling the salespeople to do the right thing back to their internal service colleagues ever. And if I ever hear they're not, I'll always be right on to them. Because if they're not doing the right thing as a supplier, then the customer can't help them when their jobs are reversed. Task 3, who are your, well, let's just answer these. I think that's it, yeah. So who are your internal customers? How well are they serviced? Who are your internal suppliers? How well are they serviced? So whatever your role is, and I don't care whether, you've got people within Fletcher's who are your colleagues, who are people that you work with as a customer or a supplier. So if I'm looking at Jack, his supplier might be Anna, and Melissa, his customers internally, or them as well, or it might be someone else. Think about that in your little ecosystem. Who are those nearest around you that act as customers to you and suppliers to you? Just think about those questions. If this is an ongoing issue, you guys need to look at the system to see if there's some way we can fix it or improve it. I don't expect you to have to do it on weekends, Sarah. There's got to be a way that this shouldn't be a problem. I'll leave it in your hands, but seek help from me if you need it. Hey, Okay, everybody. Anybody want to say anything about task number 3? About your answers, or is it easy to think about? Is it a different mindset to think about? You know, any comments at all? No. Yeah, Ian?
For me, it's sort of the happier the team is, the more you're looking after each other. It's going to just float up and down. So whether it's internal or external, if you're doing the right thing and being customer focused centric, your service level is going to make them happy, which then makes the next person happy. I think it's just a flow on effect.
Yeah, very true. If you can get somebody what they need and they're satisfied, then they usually are going to be, you know, happier about the process.
I think like suppliers with, say, marketing and, you know, whether it's finance, a vendor wants their deposit released, or we need to get an advert online, like rush. If we've done the right thing to them over time, you build that trust and rapport that they're going to push that a little bit harder for you anyway. So their level of customer service goes up in a time of crisis or need, more so than if you weren't doing the right thing normally.
Yeah, I think if we could all really think very strongly about the supplier-customer relationship, and that when you're giving something to someone, you're the supplier, and when they're giving it back to you, they're now the supplier, we would all do a lot better. And I've tried to instill that into Fletcher's as much as possible for people to think that way. That if you're giving something to marketing and you don't give them everything they need, then how can you expect them to do the job? And vice versa. And particularly when I first arrived, the salespeople just had no time whatsoever for anyone else, and they just thought it was entirely the tail wagging the dog. And I had to re-educate the sales team and the people that we were re-engaging to understand that it's not at all that. If you want them to do something for you on a timely basis, they can't do it unless you give them what they need. Otherwise, they're going back and forth. And so I think if we could all wear that hat, that 1 minute I'm a customer, the next minute I'm a supplier, I got that hat on, I got this hat on, then we would all just work so much more smoothly together all the time than we do. And yet I think we're pretty good at it. Again, 80-20, but that extra 20% could make a huge difference as well. Anybody else want to comment about task 3 before we move on? So this whole customer value is driven from leadership through the internal services out to our frontline people and delivering that customer value. And that's what, in your world as a leader at Fletcher's, that's what you're trying to do, is instill this goal that we want to have a high level of service. And I've got to provide that, the people next to me, and they've got to provide that to people next to them to be able to deliver it to the people out there at the other end. Because a salesperson or a PM person cannot deliver value to their clients if we don't deliver it to them first within Fletcher's. As simple as that. If they say, I can get your marketing schedule up and ready to go in 3 days, and we can't do that, then they're telling their client something that they can't achieve. The relationship goes a bit down, further down, entirely dependent. When we tell them it'll all happen here and this is what's going to go on and the board's going to happen like this, and then it doesn't, there's always a problem. So that internal quality is going to determine our external quality all the time. So think about this adding value to the internal customer. What could you do to improve that? And who treats you as an internal customer? What do they do to add value to you? Just think about that for a minute. Just look at those questions. How can we get better? In other words, what can you do to improve your little ecosystem? All right, guys. Anyone have any comments about number 4?
Bradley, I think that I've had an example of something that's happened today that sort of speaks to this a little bit. And I think it does boil down to communication and process improvement as well. So I had someone send me an email asking me about a particular process, and I responded with what the process was, and they responded by email, well, I don't agree with that, and I think it should be like this, and I'm going to bring it up at the sales meeting with Riley tomorrow morning. And I thought, okay, all right, I'll just let that sit for a little bit. I haven't responded, and I thought I'll just let me think about how I want to deal with this. And I actually agree with what he's saying. So I'm hopefully today after the meeting, I'm actually going to give him a call and let him know that I actually agree with what he's saying, and I'm happy to receive constructive criticism and suggestions about how things should be done. And I'll take it on board. And in future, if he's got any sort of suggestions for me, or if he disagrees with something, I'm happy to discuss it with him.
Good. And often it's helpful to ask, well, how do you think it should be done, or how would you do it? And
yeah,
but it's important to realize that not everyone sees from 360. People often see it from their own perspective only, and they don't realize that there's controls in place for this reason, or we do it this way because that's the way the software does it.
Yeah.
No disrespect to Riley, he's incredible, but Riley shoots from the hip at times, and early on he would make policy changes because someone would say something. He'd go, "Yeah, I think we should do it that way," and he'd send instructions to do it X, not realizing the software doesn't let us do it like that. So we have to. You're the architect of your role, and people can provide feedback, but you can't just jump at that feedback. You got to look at it, analyze it, work out what's best within the constraints of internal controls, system controls, everything else to make sure you get the right outcome. And it's not always. Sometimes it's not always just the best answer is the easiest, simplest, because sometimes it just doesn't let us. Like
that's right.
Our payroll system with caps is very defined, and to make programming changes to add more flexibility can be done, but it's got to be smartly done. Because 1, it's expensive. 2, it affects other things. 3, just to make a change for one person to make somebody happy is not the reason to go and change your software or your systems. And remember that every change leads to some unforeseen consequence as a result. So we've got to be very mindful when we're changing things, and this is what cycle time reduction will look at, but when we're changing something, we have to think about, well, what else is it going to affect? I'll give you a different example, but all the COVID regulations, they change so often, it's hard to keep track of what you can and can't do. How many people can we have in our house? Can we go there? Can we do this? Can we, where do we, it's just hard to stay on top of it. And the same thing happens with your own systems. As you keep changing things, it sort of gets lost from what we, initially trying to do. So, the most important thing that people want is to be heard and to know that you're taking their comments seriously, not necessarily that you're implementing what they suggest. It's more the fact that, yes, I hear you. I appreciate that's an issue. I'm gonna take it on board. I'm gonna look at it and see if there's a way that we can deal with it. But we are constrained by our software, etc. But let me look at it and I'll come back to you, because I think that's sensible comment. That's what people want. And if you do go back to them to say, look, we've looked at it, and we've discussed it with Riley, we discussed it with Melissa, for these 2 reasons, we're not going to do it. Number 1, the software doesn't let us do it. Number 2, there's a reason why we have this control in place, and it's to make sure that these things balance at this end and whatever it is. And people can live with that. The fact is that you've taken in their feedback, you've looked at it, you've made an informed decision, and most people are okay with that. That's my experience. Other comments or anything? Okay, thank you for that. And the same questions apply to your external customers. So, or suppliers. Just think for a little bit, those people you deal with that are outside of Fletcher's, that affect your life, both at a customer and a supplier. relationship and answer those questions. You want more? Come on, Al. What? Okay, we might, anyone have any comments or thoughts about these external people in terms of value and what we talked about? Anything that comes up?
I'll go, Bradley. For me, it was trying to ensure that you both understand, I suppose, how the other operates. So, for example, with a supplier, they would be an external customer in a way for me. You know, understanding when they might place an order, or how would you prefer to receive this particular correspondence. Simple things that you can find out to make sure that you have a valuable working relationship, rather than presuming or deciding for yourself how you want them to operate for you. I think working out how you can best work together is the most important thing for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's just fundamental. And if you think about removing barriers between us, suppliers, customers, then the service equation is going to be a lot easier. So when you even think about the same thing you just said about your vendors you're dealing with, or the buyers, and you say, well, how would you like, that's the whole thing behind when I implemented the client feedback, the vendor requirements form for the sales process was exactly for that, to say, well, how do you want us to talk to you? How do you want to receive information? What happens if you have tenants? How do you feel about private inspections? All in a design to try to work out the customer value model, so we can provide a customer service model, which we'll cover in our next session. Both of those for that same reason. It's the same with suppliers. One of the earliest things I did was work with every one of our suppliers to try to create as barrier proof as possible systems that, we all work together, as opposed to, I'll give you an example. When I first started, we were with a company called Crofts, and they did our copy for us. And this was a day where we didn't have Campaign Track or its predecessors. And we would give them the artwork, and they would then mock it up, and they'd send it back to us all by faxing, and we'd get it faxed, and we'd then make changes, and we'd send the fax back to them, and they'd make more changes, and they'd come back, and they wouldn't have done the changes we asked for. It was a really bad process. And when I went to meet with them to discuss it, I got this 1920s view of the world from their owner manager telling me, well, that's the way we do it. And I said, but it doesn't work. You're making us go back and forth and telling you the same things more than once to fix. And we can't do that. If we can't rely on you to fix what we're asking you the first time, then it just creates double the work, and there's a much greater chance of error. And there's too many errors happening in our copy. And I just got shit from them. And I said, well, our contract says we have to give you 1 month's notice, and I'm giving you that 1 month's notice right now. We're done. And we moved on to an automated system called Vertic, the first one. And because they weren't willing to work with us to remove barriers and problems and errors, but lots of our suppliers we did work really well with. And that's that whole thing, it doesn't matter. Sit down with your customer, work out what they want. Sit down with your suppliers, work out what they want and how they need you to do things. And all of a sudden you just get this system. And that's the whole thing about Six Sigma created that. The whole TQM philosophy created that sort of idea that our suppliers are fundamental to this outcome. And then TQM and TQS really furthered it with the whole thing that customer is the center point. Everything should be built around that customer. So I'm going to stop there today, because we sort of enter another phase of TQS next time, and we're about out of time. And we'll do that Monday week. Remember, there's no session this Wednesday. Before we finish, does anyone have any questions or comments or anything about anything we covered today? No? Oh, I hope you enjoyed it. It's a good introduction, I think, into what quality is all about. Makes you think, and I'd ask you all to look at those exercises you did today and see, how can I make those become reality in my little ecosystem? How can I improve the relationships between my customer suppliers, between my internal, my external? Where's the feedback situation? Am I getting enough feedback? Do I seek it? If I never ask and I don't know, probably a lot of people maybe not happy. Is there anything that's not working? And is there anything I do that is continually having a problem, like people are having a problem with it? Because that's something that should be looked at. Or is there something I keep getting from someone that's a problem? For example, they're not giving me the information I need. I've asked them several times. It's time to fix the system. It's time to talk to them about a permanent change to the way you do it. So think about those things that through those first few exercises today that you might be able to do to make your little world that much better and Fletcher's world better. All right. Enjoy your week, everybody. I'll see you next Monday.
Thank you, Bradley.
Thanks,
Bye.
Bradley.
Have fun.
Oh, awesome.
Thank you, Bradley.
You're welcome, everyone.